HOA creep called me boomer and harassed my wife. Can you believe it? Well, it made I quietly bankrupted the entire HOA. He called me boomer because my front yard looked tired after knee surgery, and that same week he started checking on my wife on her morning runs, now that I couldn't walk the block with her. 6 months later, the HOA didn't exist anymore. I'm Bill Miller, 60, ex-Army engineer. I keep my flag on the porch, my wedding ring on, and my pickup cleaner than some people's cars. I don't shout when some HOA kid with a drone hits on my wife and hides behind letters. I file a report. I check boxes. I keep a backup copy. It started on a humid Houston morning when Todd, drone-happy, smartwatch glow, self-appointed security chair, read a notice on my lawn like it was a punchline. He held it up and said loud enough for neighbors on both sides to hear, "Maybe if you weren't such a boomer, you could keep up." Mary, my wife, cut him off. She always does. But the damage was done. The laughter, the tilt of heads, the little whispers that make a neighborhood believe a story that isn't true. I stood there with my cane folded beside the truck and did what I always do when someone tries to make me small. I started a document. Dates, emails, who said what, who saw it. Quietly, methodically. If you want to see how a quiet man can make a racket without raising his voice, subscribe to the channel. You'll want to stick around for this one. That moment was the promise. He wanted a stage. He got a dossier. People who meet me on the porch usually take one look at the flag, the toolbox in the garage, my Chevy spotless bumper, and peg me as the kind of man who keeps his nose to his own yard. That's exactly what I wanted. Peace, routine, no drama. I'm Bill Miller, 60, ex-Army engineer. I like things squared away, measured twice, done once. I like a nod of respect when I walk down the street, not a performance. Mary and I moved into our brick ranch of that quiet life. Barbecues, a neighborly wave, a front lawn that didn't require a stadium light to appreciate. We wanted normal, ordinary but dignified. My Army years taught me a lot about systems, how they fail, and how a tiny mistake can cascade if nobody records the steps. As an engineer, I learned that paperwork isn't bureaucracy. It's insurance against chaos. So when Mary and I bought this house, I brought the habit with me. I kept a stack of maintenance receipts in the glove box. I logged emails. I filed warranties. I have a binder with copies of the HOA covenants because I learned early that people forget what's written unless you don't. Mary was the one who shook that complacency loose. She's 30, full of life, sharp as a tack. People see her and assume she needs protecting, but she has no patience for nonsense. She ran a little in the mornings, waving at neighbors, stopping to chat. When she pruned the rose bushes, she did it with a grin and a steel glove. She wasn't interested in being anyone's trophy. She just hates watching someone get away with being a bully. She was the first to tell me, plainly, that we didn't have to swallow everything for the sake of keeping the peace. For years, the neighborhood functioned like any other suburban organism. Some pride, some complaint, mostly uneventful. I kept my lawn tidy because I like it, not because anyone was watching. I kept my truck clean because it reminded me of the discipline that steadied me in rough places. I put the flag up every morning because it's how I start the day. Small rituals, small dignity. Then the knee happened. Simple procedure, arthroscopic, they said, but it grounded me for weeks. I went from touching up the trim to trusting Mary to take the lead on watering and mowing while I healed. I left instructions and I logged the dates, doctor's visits, prescriptions, a note to the HOA via email explaining the timetable. I could see the grass losing momentum, a few brown scallops where I could kneel to reseed. Nothing dramatic, nothing shameful. But to some people, ordinary fatigue looks like neglect. I've always been a quiet man. I don't like shouting. I learned, in places where shouting costs lives, that tone gets you injured. Procedure keeps you safe. When someone wanted to make me small, I didn't get loud. I documented. I dated everything. I put copies in the binder and a backup on a thumb drive that sits in a drawer in my workshop. I learned to never trust a single copy. Too many times a file vanishes because the wrong person forgot to file it or a chair signed something without reading it. So, Before there was any real trouble, I had already laid the foundation for protection. That was my plan. Keep life simple, keep details exact, and let the facts speak louder than the petty theater of a self-appointed watchman. I wanted respect, yes, but mostly I wanted Mary safe and our home left in normalcy. What I didn't expect was a young man with a drone, a phone full of live feeds, and the kind of arrogance that believes rules are tools to be wielded rather than laws to be followed. Todd wasn't just new to our street. He was new to the idea that he could be the stage. He saw my quiet as weakness. He mistook my patience for permission. And that's how the first little crack formed in the calm we'd built. A glance, a whispered comment. The sort of thing that feels minor until everyone in a suburban cul-de-sac repeats it like a rumor. I can still picture the calm before everything accelerated. The humidity that settles over Houston in the morning. The smell of cut grass. My pickup's engine ticking as it cooled. I wanted to keep that morning. All I wanted was to heal and to be left alone. But peace, as I learned again and again, is fragile in a place where someone thinks their noise is authority. And when someone decides to make a scene, small things become evidence and sympathy turns into spectacle. So I leaned on the only toolkit that never failed me: checklists, dates, copies, witnesses. I prepared myself the way an engineer prepares a bridge for a storm. I didn't say much. I started to record everything. Quiet, methodical, stubbornly correct. That was the backstory. Why I value order, why I refuse to be baited, and why I would rather build a case than a confrontation. Because in the end, it's not the loudest voice that wins a community. It's the one with the receipts. He held the little white notice up like it was a trophy and read it slow enough for the whole block to hear. Maintenance violation. Front yard requires attention. He smiled at the attention, then looked at Mary and me, then said loud so everyone could lean in, "Maybe if you weren't such a boomer, you could keep up." The words landed like gravel. I remember the humidity hanging off the oaks that morning, my pickup ticking in the driveway, the smell of cut grass. Todd had his smartwatch glowing and his drone folded on the bench like a pet. He loves an audience. He loves a camera. He loves authority with a speaker's echo. Mary's face changed. She's not someone who freezes at nonsense. She stepped forward, planted her elbows, and said, "That's enough, Todd." But the laughter had already started, a soft ripple from porches, a couple of chuckles from the Cullens 2 doors down, the kind of laughter that spreads a story faster than the truth. I folded my cane and set it against the bump of the truck because I do things in order. I don't shout. I don't wave my hands. I keep lists. When someone comes at you with noise, you don't match the decibels. You outlast them with facts. I kept my eyes on Todd for a beat longer than felt friendly. He wanted reaction. He wanted the stage. He wanted the neighborhood to pick a side with their comments and their posture. Instead, I took out my phone and opened the Notes app. I'd learned long before HOA subpoenas and clubhouse politics that humiliation is a currency people trade in public spaces. It buys them attention and moral cover. Todd used the notice as a prop, and the drone was his curtain. He hovered over 1,000 little social errors and called them proof. But what he couldn't buy with optics was the one thing that always matters in the end: documentation. So I started writing. Date, time, who was present. Todd read notice aloud on porch. Mary intervened. Neighbors reacted. I recorded the email I'd already sent to the HOA about my knee surgery and the temporary delay in landscaping. I snapped a photo of the notice in the lawn from 3 angles: front, side, close-up of the dead spots. I saved a screenshot of Todd's live feed when he posted that smug video with the caption, "Keeping Our Standards." I added witness notes. Mrs. Ortega from across the street, who saw the whole thing, Jerome, the retired mail carrier, who always notices details. Little things that mean nothing to an attention seeker look like chains when they're linked together. Todd's tactic was classic. Make the story personal and loud enough that people stop looking for the truth. He called me a boomer, as if age equals neglect. He smirked like that had settled the argument. But people forget that age also carries experience, sometimes in the form of a binder on a shelf with receipts that don't lie. I wrote that down, too. I don't argue, I document. It felt like a motto and a weapon at once. Mary didn't want drama. Neither did I. She wanted the disrespect to stop and for our morning runs and barbecues to go back to normal. I wanted the same thing, quietly and cleanly, but there are times when quietness is mistaken for passivity. When that happens, somebody decides to step on a person because the pressure feels good. I could have lost my temper. I could have marched up and demanded apologies. Instead, I started to collect. There's a rhythm to it, dates, copies, a backup. I printed the HOA covenants and placed them in a folder that already smelled faintly of motor oil and coffee. I copied the email about my surgery and added the doctor's note. I called the HOA administration and recorded the name of the woman who answered and the time she put me on hold. I wrote down the model of Todd's drone. DJI fandom, I think, expensive toys make people bolder. Every seemingly trivial detail get the meaning when you stack them up. At the end of that day, Todd posted the video and got the little applause he craved. Neighbors messaged him with thumbs-up emojis. He probably slept proud, thinking he'd cowed the older man and embarrassed the younger woman. But that night, under the lamp of my workbench, I transferred those notes to my binder, backed the file to a thumb drive, and labeled it HOA Incident July 14th. He wanted noise. I brought receipts. If you're getting into this with me and you want to see how a quiet man flips a power play into a paper trail, hit the like button now. Trust me, it gets better. I didn't respond. I just started to record. The neighborhood turned on a dime. One loud comment, one drone clip, and suddenly my porch conversations became a public thread. I started seeing the first signs a day or two after Todd staged his little performance. A folded note tucked under our mailbox that said, in neat block letters, "Keep our standards." No signature. A sticker on a lamppost down the street with the HOA logo and the line "Community First." Someone had scrawled, "No slackers," across the bottom in a shaky Sharpie. It wasn't just ink and paper. The story metastasized into behavior. Neighbors who used to wave past us on the street with their eyes averted. The woman from 3 doors over, who'd once borrowed sugar from Mary, started crossing to the other side of the sidewalk like she'd caught a disease. Small, deliberate slights. Invitations left unopened, clipped community updates shoved under our door at odd hours, and worst of all, a private Facebook group that filled with curated photos of other lawns and comment threads cataloging. Examples to follow. They called it standards. It felt like a jury. Todd's camera did its work. His drone started showing up where it didn't belong. Overhead when Mary went for a morning run, hovering while she watered the roses. He would post clips with captions, monitoring compliance, and the thumbs-up crowd would pile on. "Keeping our standards," he'd write, as if standards were a performance metric he owned. The drone's hum became its own kind of intimidation. It was petty, it was invasive, and it was impossible to ignore. Mary felt it the most. People misread her kindness as weakness. They whispered that she let me relax. They used her smiles from the grocery store as evidence of neglect. Once, while she was trimming, an envelope fell at her feet. Inside was a list, names of residents, and a check mark next to those labeled compliant. Ours had no check mark. It's funny how a blank box can humiliate you more than a harsh note. What surprised me wasn't the cruelty so much as the machinery. Gossip is lazy but effective. It needs small, repeatable acts. The note on the lawn, the whispered, I heard, the forwarded screenshot. People prefer certainty over curiosity. Todd understood that. He fed it. I watched neighbors rehearsing the lines. He wanted them to believe. I watched a few who knew us well, like Jerry, the retired postal carrier, pull away at first because social pressure is contagious. That's when my binder earned its keep. I started collecting the artifacts like a man gathering wreckage after a storm. The envelope from Mary went into a clear sleeve. The lamppost sticker I peeled off with gloves and put in the folder. I screenshot the Facebook posts, timestamps and all, and printed them. I logged who had delivered notices and when. I wrote names in the margin. Mrs. Delgado, who dropped off skewed praise for Todd. Pastor Chan, who'd been asked for a public statement and demurred. Each small thing got a line in my notes. Date, time, context. I also started talking quietly to the people who mattered, not to argue, to gather witness accounts. Jerome, the retired mailman who'd seen Todd's drone circle Mary twice, gave me a short, steady statement. Mrs. Ortega, who'd heard Todd announce a notice aloud, wrote down what she'd seen and left in my mailbox with a post-it. Saw it all? Not right. Those little declarations are the opposite of a whisper. They're deliberate. Todd began to escalate his optics when the passive pressure didn't get the result he wanted. He placed a laminated poster in the clubhouse titled Community Standards Enforcement. He printed a list of supposed violations and, without a vote, put copies in everyone's door. He started sending mass emails signed as security chair with bolded words like compliance and accountability. The board, to its credit, tried to look neutral, but someone in administration forwarded one of Todd's emails with the line, approved for distribution, and that's the kind of slip that leaves fingerprints. And then came the small cruelties that sting long after an insult. Yard signs that appeared overnight reading, "Respect our rules," anonymous texts about neighbors who won't pull their weight, and a rumor that Todd had spoken in a nearby HOA meeting and called out our example. Mary faced it with her usual sharpness. She confront a person and cut the act clean, but the accumulation of slights wears you down. People are good at believing a story that flatters their sense of order. So I did what I always do. I didn't rise to the bait. I logged every note, every poster, every drone clip. I filed physical copies in order: envelope, sticker, poster, photo, then created a digital mirror on thumb drive. I dated each entry the way I clocked the maintenance on a generator. My checklist underlined the purpose: collect, corroborate, preserve. I didn't want to be loud. I wanted to be undeniable. The neighborhood social pressure had sharpened into a faster, stranger thing: selective exclusion. Todd wanted us quiet, not because we'd actually done anything, but because he wanted the stage clean of distractions. He wanted Mary's attention and my silence. He started a campaign to shape the narrative, and people who liked certainty took his version as gospel. If you're picture me turning to some impulsive counterattack, no, I'm not that man. I let the evidence pile up. I kept my flag on the porch, and my Chevy where it always was. I kept making lists. The louder he tried to make the neighborhood, the more patient I got. He wanted noise. I kept adding documents. Then the little jabs turned into paperwork, and the paperwork turned into a machine that bit. At first it was the usual: a yellow slip tucked on the door, violation, front yard maintenance. Then another and another, each one slightly more formal, stapled to the mailbox, mail with certified receipts that required a signature Mary refused to give because she didn't feel like legitimizing the theater. Todd upped the tempo from optics to ordinance. We're enforcing standards, his emails read, all caps and bold, copied to the board and to the management company. I watched the timestamps and the distribution. Lists like I'd watch a schematic while troubleshooting a relay. There was a pattern, and patterns tell you intent more clearly than shouting ever could. They brought in people who sounded official. An inspector showed up, no badge, just a clipboard and a polite smile. He circled the yard with a tape measure and wrote numbers on a pad as if those numbers had moral weight. A contractor the HOA recommended offered a courtesy cleanup and quoted a fee that'd make my jaw ache. A towing notice appeared on the Chevy one morning because, they said, my truck partially obstructed the sidewalk during pickup times that hadn't existed in any prior rule. The drone kept showing up at Mary's morning runs, scrubbing the airspace like a vulture. Each action read like confirmation, enforcement, escalation, and a deliberate aim to make us uncomfortable. What surprised some of the neighbors was how precise the escalation felt. It wasn't random. The management company signed off on several of the notices. The president of the board forwarded one of Todd's drafts with "looks good" in the body of an email. That's the kind of slip that leaves fingerprinted paper trails. I printed those emails. 2 copies. Ink never sleeps. They leveled a fine, $2.50 for failure to maintain, and another for late response. The letter said fines were cumulative until compliance. That word, cumulative, is the HOA's financial weapon. It's quiet like interest. It eats people's patience and then their wallets. I watched the arithmetic, the way they calculated due dates and late fees. It's the language of pressure. I also watched how quickly a community's moral outrage can be weaponized when someone frames it as defending standards. But the real sting wasn't the money. It was the orchestration of privacy invasion and social isolation. Todd posted a 6-minute clip on the neighborhood feed showing my yard from the drone's POV, zooming in on the brown spots as if they were evidence of moral failing. The comments rolled in, "About time," "Keep our standards," "Maybe a little help for the elderly." The subtext was clear. Make them smaller, make them lonely, make them ask for mercy. Mary and I got calls from neighbors asking if we were all right. The kind of calls that sound helpful until you realize the caller already believes the worst. Someone left a flyer in our mailbox listing community volunteers. Names circled in red were non-compliant, according to whoever printed it. Anonymous complaints slid into the management portal. Each one was logged with a reference number, as legitimate as a stamped envelope. The HOA had learned something vital. Process creates authority. Once a complaint is logged, even if it's anonymous nonsense, it looks official. I could have confronted Todd then and there, pull him by the collar, asked him to stop playing at law. But that's not my way. If a system is misapplied, you don't shout at the misapplied part. You expose a design flaw. So I did the only thing that had ever kept me safe in messy places. I asked for receipts. I wrote a calm, typed letter to the management company, and copied the board. Please provide, I wrote, all complaints received regarding 42 Oakview, dates, times, and the names or sources of those complaints. Please provide the chain of authorization for any drone surveillance, any contractor engaged, and any fines levied. I requested minutes from a meeting where enforcement policies were approved and the vendor contracts that authorized their so-called security measures. I asked, politely, for exact sections of the covenants they claimed I'd violated. I hit send and saved a copy. Then I printed a hard copy, signed it, and mailed it certified. That afternoon, Todd posted a photo of the notice on his feed with the caption, "Accountability works." He wanted applause. I replied with a single line beneath the post. Please provide the signed complaint supporting this notice, per HOA rules. It was nothing dramatic. It was a square peg in a round hole for someone who'd built a career on optics. The comment threaded under his post like a thin wire ready to trip. It's easy to mock paperwork until the paperwork asks for proof. And when you ask for proof, people who build authority on the flimsiest of props start to sweat. If you've been through something like this, have you ever been targeted by a neighbor or an HOA? Tell me in the comments. I want to know what you did next. For now, the machine hummed. Notifications, fines, drone clips, and passive-aggressive flyers continued their little war. But every stamped envelope, every screenshot, every certified mail receipt, those were breadcrumbs. Todd wanted a public spectacle. I wanted a ledger. He was building a stage. I was building a case. I didn't raise my voice. I kept writing things down. You ever notice how people assume the quieter man is harmless? I learned in the Army that the quiet ones are usually the ones who are listening, cataloging, and planning. That's what people didn't see in me the morning Todd held up that notice and called me a boomer. They saw a stooped guy with a cane. I saw a sequence of failures waiting for a single, disciplined hand to point them out. The revelation wasn't some sudden superpower. It was a lifetime of habits coming home. As an Army engineer, I read specs until they made sense. I ran maintenance logs on generators that would snap an entire convoy back to life. Paperwork to me is not red tape. It's a map of decision-making. When I watched Todd turn optics into policy, the pattern jumped off the page. Unauthorized expenses, decisions announced with no recorded vote, contractors engaged without documented approval, surveillance equipment billed under vague line items. That's not enforcement. That's improvisation with other people's money. I sat at my workbench that night, the lamp humming over my binder like a spotlight. Everyone else saw a man keeping receipts. I saw leverage. I flipped through the stack, the notice Todd posted, emails he'd sent to the distribution list, a forwarded message from the management company with "looks good" in the body. Little things that look sloppy in a contractor are fatal in governance. A missing signature, a budget line that doesn't match any voted item, invoices dated before a meeting took place. You don't need fireworks to bring an organization down. You need to find the violated procedure and follow its paper trail to the very people who signed it. I called in favors like they were routine maintenance. Jerome, the mailman who knows every day of deliveries, gave me a statement about when the first notice landed. Mrs. Ortega, who heard Todd read the notice aloud, wrote down the time and what she heard. I walked to the county records office and asked about permits. No records for the drone operations. I emailed the management company and requested copies of vendor contracts and board minutes, certified and by return receipt. I did it the way you do anything important. Slow, repetitive, irrefutable. People assume audits are expensive, complicated beasts. They aren't when mistakes are that obvious. If a board signs a contract that wasn't properly authorized, if reserve funds are used for services never voted on, if fines are assessed selectively, those are cracks an auditor sleeps on the bedrock. There were other cracks, too. An insurance policy that could be voided if the board misrepresented operations, a reserve fund depleted by security, spending that had no line item vote, and a management company that paid itself out of fees while letting governance fall to a teenager with a drone. That's the core of my power. I don't invent wrongdoing. I point to the places where process was skipped and let the system react. If the HOA want to play judge and jury with no paperwork, the county, the insurer, and the membership would ask one simple question. Where's the authorization? And if there isn't one, what you call enforcement looks a lot more like mismanagement. So I stopped trying to shame Todd on porches. I did what engineers do, draw the diagram of how the failure happened, and then test each joint. I made copies, hard copies and backups, of every notice, every email, every post. I time-stamped the drone footage I'd pulled from Todd's feed and matched it to witness accounts. I flagged billing entries that paid a contractor for monitoring with no contract attached. I documented the board president forwarding Todd's draft with looks good and no recorded vote. Each item on my checklist was small and ordinary, and that was the point. Ordinary violations are the ones boards pretend are normal until somebody points them out in black and white. When you work on infrastructure, you learn another thing. Failure propagates. A missed signature allows a contractor to invoice. An invoice gets paid out of reserves. A depleted reserve triggers a special assessment. One bad pivot at the top becomes everyone's problem at the bottom. I'd watched it happen to barracks and to bridges. The plan was basic. Expose the wrong step, force the accounting to reconcile, and let the people responsible have to explain themselves under oath or in print. That night, I filed my first formal requests and printed copies. I organized Exhibit A through K into sleeves and labeled each with short engineer's note. Proposed authorization missing. Invoice predates vote. Insurance exposure, possible void. I felt a familiarity in the motion, like setting calipers on a bearing. It wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting. It was methodical work in the glow of a bench lamp. Todd thought the drone and the loud comments were his advantage. He was loud, I was exact. And exactness has a way of making other people uncomfortable, especially when they can't stand by what they signed. I was ready to pull the thread. All I had to do was start requesting the records that would show the tangle, and wait for the strain to show through. I turned the quiet into a project. That's how I've always done it. When a problem shows up, you don't yell at it, you map it. I cleared a corner of the garage, laid out the binder under the work lamp, and labeled the sleeves like an engineer tagging parts. Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C. Each item was a small, ordinary truth. Stacked them in order, and they stopped being small. First step was timeline. I matched every notice to the emails I'd sent about my knee, to the doctor's note, to the days Mary couldn't mow. I pulled timestamps from Todd's live video, the upload time, the caption, the comments. Little technical things people shrug off matter. File properties, metadata. The exact second a drone clip was posted. If you know how cameras write time on files, you can prove when an event was manufactured to look spontaneous. That's not magic. It's habit. Then I built witness packets. Jerome the mailman wrote a short affidavit. Delivery on July 14th at 9:03 a.m. Left under mat. Mrs. Ortega gave a statement about hearing Todd read the notice aloud from the porch. I had Mary log every time the drone hovered during her run. Dates, times, what she felt. Those human notes are plain and credible. People trust specificity, so I had specifics. Next was a paper trail inside the HOA. I sent formal, signed requests for records, vendor contracts, invoices, board minutes, and any authorizations for surveillance or contractor work. I copied the management company and the board president. I don't accuse without print. I asked for it. I asked for the chain of approval for the security services line item and for any insurance claims or reserve transfers tied to that account. I saved every red receipt. I filed a second copy on a thumb drive and put a third in the glove box. Never trust a single copy is old, basic, true. I also looked at money. There were invoices marked monitoring services and payments made before any vote showed up in the minutes. One contractor had billed for repetitive drone patrols. The contract on paper was nowhere to be found. An invoice without an authorization is an unpaid question. An unpaid question becomes a liability when auditors look for protocol. I made notes beside each suspicious line. No vote, no signature, paid from reserves. Then I pushed where it would matter. I contacted an old acquaintance at the county records office and asked about permits for surveillance equipment. None. I spoke quietly with an independent accountant friend and asked him what he'd look for in a quick review. He pointed me to reserve transfers, vendor vetting, and whether funds had been used outside their intended purpose. I paid for a light audit. I could afford a cup of coffee, and the truth. Throughout, I kept the tone procedural. I sent my request as a project manager would, polite, exact, and with a deadline. I copied homeowners on the request so nothing could be hidden later as honest mistake. When Todd posted another triumphant clip, I replied below a line he hated. Please provide the signed complaint supporting this notice, per HOA rules. I didn't bait him. I asked him to produce paperwork he didn't have. People assume the quiet man is harmless. That's their mistake. I wasn't there to humiliate. I was there to make the bookkeeping tell the story. The records, the timestamps, the witness notes, they're patient. They don't need drama. They only need to be assembled. If you want to see what happens when the documents meet the meeting, the day I walked in with Exhibit A through K, subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss how a binder and a thumb drive can do more damage to a bully than any shout ever could. I don't argue. I document. I knew the moment to bait them wouldn't be loud. It would be surgical. I didn't need to trick Todd into breaking the law. I only needed to give the HOA a clear, unavoidable chance to prove how sloppy and unauthorized their whole little enforcement theater had been. So I set the trap with paper and polite deadlines, the kind that make amateurs panic and engineers smile. First, I sent the request every sane organization expects before it has to explain itself. A certified letter to the management company, copied to the board, and to every homeowner email on the roster. It read like a project brief. Please provide by close of business on August 1st. All complaints or signed notices regarding 42 Oakview in the past 90 days. Vendor contracts and invoices for monitoring or security services. Minutes from any board meetings where such services were authorized. And the chain of authorization for the drone surveillance referenced in Mr. Miller's complaint. I attached a neat list of document IDs. Exhibit A through K, so nothing could be dodged with vague references. I signed it, mailed it certified, and kept a copy in 3 places. My binder, a thumb drive, and the glove box of the Chevy. Then I did something else they couldn't easily ignore. I made the whole thing public. I posted a calm note to the neighborhood group. Request submitted to management and the board for transparency. We'll present records at the next HOA meeting. All homeowners copied. Meeting will be recorded. Nothing theatrical, just notice and fact. Public. Recorded. It got the performance trigger to twitch in Todd's hand. I also filed a formal complaint with the County Consumer Affairs Office about unauthorized surveillance and selective enforcement. That turned a neighborhood quarrel into an administrative matter with a paper trail beyond the HOA's little bubble. I sent a courtesy copy to the HOA's insurance broker and the management company's regional office. Insurance companies do not like loose ends that expose them to liability. That was deliberate. If the HOA had really been following policy, an inspector on record or a valid contract would have been an easy answer. They didn't. Between the certified letter, the neighborhood notice, and the county filing. I created a timeline that forced a choice: produce authorized paperwork or try to fix things retroactively. I knew how people under pressure think. They try to paper over mistakes. Boards backdate minutes. Vendors are given after-the-fact approvals, and signatures appear as if conjured. That kind of improvisation leaves fingerprints heavier than the original sin. I also invited witnesses. Jerome the mailman, Mrs. Ortega, the retired school principal down the street. I put them on the guest list and encouraged them to bring written statements and, if they wanted, to speak. I sent a polite note to the president. For transparency, please ensure recording devices on and minutes are taken. All homeowners may attend. I wasn't asking for drama. I was asking for accountability. Then I did one more quiet, cruelly effective thing. I put Exhibit A through K in a binder, 3-hole punch, tab, and labeled, and I left a single-page handout on the kitchen table where the board members would meet that night if they chose to panic and prepare. The handout said, "Items requested. Failure to provide will be submitted to county for review." It was a gentle shove toward honesty. Todd took the bait almost exactly the way I expected. He posted a clip that evening, a short, smug video calling me resistant to community standards and daring the board to act. A few hours later, an email from one of the board members popped into my inbox. "We will address this at the next scheduled meeting. Please attend if you wish to present evidence." Translation: stage set, microphone on. I sat with a binder under the workbench lamp and ran my fingers over the tabs. The bait wasn't mean. It was opportunity. I had forced the HOA to either produce authorization and look competent or to scramble and expose the gaps. Either way, it would no longer be about a tired patch of grass on a man healing from knee surgery. It would be about governance, contracts, and responsibility. The day of the meeting, I carried a binder like a toolbox. The room was exactly as I expected. Too much coffee, folding chairs, the hum of a projector someone insisted on testing. People trickled in, neighbors who'd been on the fence, and some who believed Todd without looking. The president called the meeting to order. Todd sat near the front, grin rehearsed, drone case at his feet, like a prop. I set the binder on the table and did what I always do. I did not shout. I did not swagger. I said, "I'm here to submit Exhibit A through K." The air held for a second, the kind of pause that feels like a judge clearing his throat. Todd wanted the stage. I had given it to him. What he was about to do when the microphone turned to him would decide everything. I don't argue. I document. When the room filled up, it felt like a current, electric, expectant. I set the binder on the table like a tool and said what I've been saying in my head for weeks. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to submit Exhibit A through K. The president tapped the microphone as if to warm it up. Todd smiled like someone who'd already rehearsed the standing ovation. He wanted the stage. He loved the stage. He'd built his whole authority out of performances. Drone clips, applause emojis, keynote tone, and mass emails. The microphone hit him like a spotlight. He stood, chest out, and said, "We enforce community standards. We protect property values." He used the words in the way people use a shield, not to explain, but to deflect. Mary spoke first, calm, precise, and very human. "He followed me on my run," she said. "He hovered the drone over me twice last month at 6:15 a.m. I have the times. I have the screenshots. I felt watched." Her voice didn't shake, and that made her account cleaner, harder to dismiss. Jerome the mailman handed the president a short note. Delivered at 9:03 a.m., left under doormat. Mrs. Ortega read aloud what she heard Todd say on the porch the morning of a notice. Then I started, not loud, methodical. I walked them through Exhibit A, the certified letter asking for records, and the certified receipts showing when the board got it. Exhibit B was an email where the president forwarded one of Todd's drafts with a sleepy line. "Looks good." Exhibit C was a contractor invoice dated days before any recorded vote. Each exhibit was like a notch on a measuring stick. Missing signature here, payment out of reserve there, no permit for surveillance overhead. You could see the room change. People who'd taken the drone footage as entertainment began to squint at the pages. The management rep's smile thinned. The president's throat worked. His fingers found the edge of his secretary's desk. If you ever watch someone realize they might have to explain themselves under oath, you know the look, the small animal lurch toward self-preservation. Then Todd tried to pivot. He rose to his feet and said, "We had community safety concerns." And in the next breath, he said, "We approved security measures." He used a plural and left his voice hanging on we. I folded to the part where the board minutes should be. "Where's the vote, Todd?" I asked, "Where's the recorded authorization?" His face went a color I hadn't seen outside of a gym after a hard set. He answered differently than he intended. "We all agreed," he said, hands gesturing toward neighbors. "We act in the board's interest." That's when the county rep, quiet until then, interjected. "Verbal agreements don't authorize expenditures," she said. "We need documented votes and signed contracts to validate these charges." Her voice was gentle but precise, the kind of voice that unmakes improvised authority. Todd's smile cracked. He tried to laugh it off, then reached for a performative line. Standards matter. But the room now had copies of invoices paid out of reserve funds, an insurance broker on the phone asking whether surveillance had been properly disclosed, and a handful of homeowners who begun to tally their own costs. A board member found a scanned document in the binder, an email from the management company with paid stamped across a contractor invoice, and the invoice showed repetitive drone patrols with no contract attached. The president cleared his voice and fumbled for words that sounded like defense. "We were protecting property values," he stopped when the accountant at the back said, "and who authorized spending from reserves without a special assessment?" The question landed with the weight of arithmetic. Mismanagement isn't glamorous. It's boring. But boring is durable, and boring numbers break reputations. Todd tried one last move, public shame. He stood and pointed toward me and said, loud enough for everyone, "Maybe if you weren't such a boomer, he never finished." Jerome, who'd watched this kind of thing his whole career, cut him off quietly. "You read that notice out loud from my porch." His voice sent a ripple through the room. People who'd once nodded at Todd's clips now compared timestamps to the minutes I'd produced. At that point, the air changed from anticipation to verdict. The county rep talked about potential insurance exposure, unauthorized surveillance, selective enforcement, unauthorized expenditures. The management rep admitted clerical errors. The president's explanation collapsed from a speech into a timeline of omissions. Todd's bravado mutated into tangles of, "I thought," and "we sort of," and that's when you could see the audience flip from curiosity to anger. Someone shouted, "Can we vote to audit?" And hands went up. The same people who'd liked the drone videos now wanted to know how their money was being spent. The recall conversation started as a murmur and built like a storm. That's the thing about procedure. When it's followed, people trust the outcome. When it's abused, people want heads. If you were here, what would you have called out? Tell me in the comments. Did I do the right thing by bringing a binder, or should I have stormed the podium? I want to hear how you'd have handled a bully with a drone. By the time the county auditor finished his review, the room smelled like old coffee and new panic. I sat in the second row, binder closed on my lap, and watched the board's veneer peel away in stages. The auditor had the kind of slow voice that makes people confess to the easiest thing first. Paperwork. He read the list. Unauthorized expenditures, vendor invoices with no contract, surveillance billed to reserves, minutes that didn't match bank withdrawals, and each line was another nail in a very ordinary coffin. Mismanagement. It's a boring term. It's also lethal to a small association that depends on trust and dues. When an insurance broker called the president 2 days later, the tone changed. If surveillance was represented differently in policy documents, we have an exposure, she said. That meant potential denial of coverage. Denied coverage in an HOA is not academic. It's practical. If there's no insurer to pay claims, the association subtly owes everything it promised to defend. If an association can't pay, homeowners might be hit with a special assessment. You can watch a neighborhood go from barbecue to bankruptcy in 3 polite letters. The management company tried to spin it. Administrative oversight. They called in emails that read like someone trying to dress a wound with a bandana. The vendor who'd been billing for drone patrols demanded payment, and then threatened to pull services unless the invoices were immediately cleared. The president offered a clumsy apology at the next meeting and asked for patience. People who've been proud of standards now stared at bank statements. Patience is expensive when you're told the reserves are gone. A recall petition circulated faster than Todd's drone ever could. I watched neighbors who'd once liked his clips now sign in sober, deliberate ink. "We trusted you." One neighbor told the president quietly, "We want to know where our money went." The vote to audit passed by a margin that left the old guard short friends. The board members who'd shrugged at emails and forwarded drafts found themselves answering to a membership face-to-face, vote-to-vote, about decisions they let happen without the slightest record. Accountability is not theatrical. It's math. Todd's fall happened in public, slow and granular. He tried the old tricks, bluster, rhetorical appeals to safety, the same posture he used on the porch. But the exhibits I brought were clinical. Time-stamped video, certified mail receipts, invoices with no approvals, and the management company's own forwarded email that said, "Looks good." He kept reaching for microphone and came up with sentences that suggested he confused enthusiasm with authority. Neighbors who'd once applauded his posts asked him questions that couldn't be answered with a clip. Who authorized these charges? Where's the vote? He answered with half-phrases, and half-phrases don't pay invoices or keep insurance companies happy. Legal pressure followed. A group of homeowners filed a demand for damages and for forensic accounting. The management company quietly negotiated a settlement with a vendor in the HOA, but the cost was a gut punch, a special assessment proposal that would have doubled everyone's annual dues for emergencies created by mismanagement. That's when the collective memory of community standards reversed. Suddenly the standard was fiscal sanity. The proposed assessment failed at the ballot because people refused to accept the bill for other people's mistakes. With reserves tapped and no insurance coverage for the exposure the board had created, the HOA faced insolvency. The management company resigned to limit its liability. The president stepped down, citing health. Todd resigned his security chair title, still looking for a stage to perform the dignity he'd spent months manufacturing. The vendor pursued collections, and the board that remained had to face the only practical option: dissolve and restructure, or face lawsuits that would bleed the association dry. The members voted to restructure, new board, stricter bylaws, mandatory transparency, limits on surveillance, and a clause requiring documented votes for any expenditures above a modest threshold. People learned what trust actually costs. As for Todd, his drone case traded hands, and his social following thinned faster than he could post. Some neighbors refused to speak to him. Others, who'd enjoyed the spectacle, admitted later that they wished they'd looked at the minutes. Mary and I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in watching someone lose face. The satisfaction was quieter. The flag still on the porch, the Chevy's bumper catching the late sun, the knowledge that procedure, boring, stubborn, exact, had protected us. The real consequence was structural. The HOA now had new leadership that mandated transparency, required third-party audits, and barred unilateral expenditures. The management company was replaced with one that insisted on double signatures and published monthly statements. Neighbors who'd rallied behind optics learned to ask for receipts. We had a community meeting months later where people thanked me in small, awkward ways. Jerome clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You kept your cool, son." That did it. So yes, the HOA changed. People lost positions, reputation scraped dirt, and a vendor who'd been paid without a contract learned that invoices need signatures. Bills were paid, settlements negotiated, and a handful of families paid higher dues during restructuring. Not because I wanted punishment, but because a broken system had to be repaired. If that sounds like a Pyrrhic win to some, it wasn't to me. Justice in this case was a spreadsheet that balanced. If you're still here and you like seeing how patience and paperwork beat bluster and drones, hit the like button now. It helps the channel, and it helps keep stories like this front of mind, because a quiet method beats a loud bully more often than people think. I never pictured a binder and a thumb drive becoming legend on Oakview, but they did after the dust settled. People kept asking me what it felt like to watch a system collapse under the weight of its own shortcuts. The honest answer is simple. It felt like quiet justice. No fireworks, no shouting, just a slow, inevitable accounting of consequences. Mary and I came out with the same people who went into it. Only the neighborhood looked different when we stepped back onto the porch. The flag still caught the late light. The Chevy still wore the same nick in the bumper. I can't quite stop fussing over. What changed was the way our neighbors looked at paperwork and one another. There was a new skepticism for quick spectacles and a new appetite for minutes, signatures, and receipts. Todd kept walking past our house for a while, head down, drone tucked away. He'd been young, loud, and convinced that optics were a substitute for authority. The binder I brought to that meeting turned his theater into a spreadsheet. He didn't get to be the hero anymore. He got to be a cautionary example of what happens when you confuse enthusiasm with authorization. Some people forgave quickly. Others didn't. He lost his title, his influence, and most of the applause he banked on. The board that remained had to answer for the money that had vanished in vague line items and surprise invoices. The management company that had been sloppy found itself replaced. The insurance broker asked the right questions and then stepped away from exposures that hadn't been properly disclosed. Vendors that had been paid without contracts were left with nothing but claims. There were settlements, yes. Some negotiated quietly to limit litigation, but the real remedy was structural. The homeowners voted for new bylaws that read like a checklist I would write. Clear vote threshold for expenditures, mandatory publication of meeting minutes within 7 days, double signatures on reserve transfers, a prohibition on unapproved surveillance, and the right to forensic audit if reserves fell below a threshold. They set up a standing audit committee and required the management company to rotate every 5 years. We insisted on transparency because once you watch the arithmetic of mismanagement, you stop trusting spin. Neighbors who crossed the street to avoid us came back with small apologies, some awkward, some generous. Jerome the mailman stopped by with a thermos and a rough grin. "You kept your cool, Pops," he said, and that was enough. Mary kept running in the mornings, though now she had fewer cameras following her and more neighbors waving as they passed. The community lunches returned, tentative at first, then loud and unembarrassed. I didn't get satisfaction from Todd's downfall. I won't claim glee. What I felt was the odd comfort of the system doing what it was designed to do when someone insisted do so. Paper forces answers, and answers force accountability. My satisfaction was in watching people learn the cost of shortcuts and choose to do better. There were costs. Some families saw temporary increases in dues as the association repaired itself. People argue about fairness and who should bear the bill for mistakes made at the top. That debate is messy and necessary. You can't unspend money. You can only decide who pays to correct the bookkeeping. In the end, the community chose resilience over denial. As for me, the neighbors started telling stories, half in admiration, half in disbelief, about the man who kept a toolbox and a binder. They called me things I didn't expect. Careful, steady, necessary. Kids pointed the flag and said, "That's his grandfather's truck." Mary laughed when a teenager asked if I ever mouthed off. "Nope," I told him. "I file." That became the joke, and then the lesson. If one thing worries me, it's that these same dynamics exist in other little town squares, other committees, and other self-appointed monitors who mistake opinion for oversight. After all this, I started getting notes from folks in other neighborhoods asking for advice. I answer the ones I can. The method is never glamorous. Document, request, publicize, and let the processes do the work. In that neighborhood, the war with the HOA was over. But for those who know the system from the inside, they know there's always another committee present somewhere who thinks they're above the law. Subscribe to the channel and watch the absurd story that occurred at another HOA. Click on the video that's